Welcome back, No Fly Zone listeners, ladies, gents, and Florida Thems. We're so happy to have you back. All like two of you. You're beautiful and perfect. I would die for you. You probably remember that we are partially through, I'm not even going to say halfway through, talking about this dipshit Israel Keys, who people tend to overglorify as like, oh my god, the smartest or the most meticulous, super serial killer ever. Give it time, guys. You're going to see the cracks in his armor. We are going to pick back up. We talked about his upbringing. We talked about his military service, religious beliefs, and then kind of lack thereof, and some of his early victims and methodology. We're going to continue after building that foundation for you. Super, super heavy stuff. But first, a disclaimer. This episode in particular will contain some incredibly graphic content, which thank you guys for reminding me, because jaded monster that I am, nothing clicks with me as far as what normal people hear. And it was only, I think I listened to one podcast where someone was like expressing shock through the whole Israel Keys story. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that's pretty dark. I guess it is. So we do want to preface that. Agreed. For those of you who are not robots or soulless or whatever the other pleasant things my captain would call me, beware. There's some crazy, heavy, dark, nasty, terrible, gross shit in this episode, and feel free to not listen if that isn't your jam. It's okay. Nobody's going to shame you. But with that being said, I'm going to let Bret kick it off with the tragedy of Bill and Lorraine Currier.
Thanks, Clouds. Bill and Lorraine Currier, on a quiet night in June, that force of pure evil broke into a Vermont couple's home, beginning a night of horrific torture and violence as the couple desperately fought to the end for their lives. Bill and Lorraine Currier were a bit of, quote, home buddies, preferring to stay in their quiet Essex home with their pets. But on a June night in 2011, the couple encountered a notorious serial killer who chose their home at random, in part because of the home's simple ranch floor plan and signs that it was unlikely any children were living at the home. By all accounts, they were friendly, peaceful, good people who encountered a force of pure evil acting at random. U.S. Attorney Tristram Coffin would later say of the murders. Israel Keys would later tell investigators that he had flown from Anchorage to Chicago with plans to visit his brother in Maine. But after renting a car and heading east, he decided to take a deadly detour. So wait. He flew into Chicago to drive to Maine?
Yeah.
Good catch.
That's not a short drive at all.
He does that a lot. He does that a lot. He'll fly into places nowhere near where he intends to go and then drive a rental car with X number of unaccounted for miles put on that rental car, during which time, shocker, he was probably out murdering.
Holy shit. Well, when Keys was passing through Burlington, he decided to dig up a 5-gallon bucket he'd buried several years earlier that held zip ties, ammunition, guns, silencer, Drano, and duct tape, and began his search for potential victims. And according to an excerpt of Maureen Callahan's new book, American Predator, published in the New York Post, Keys came upon the Currier's home a little after midnight after walking on foot from his nearby hotel. This guy's just a creep. He cut the couple's phone line, broke into the home's attached garage, and soon made his way into the kitchen in what he called a blitz attack that took only a matter of seconds. Keys made his way to the couple's bedroom, where he found Bill, age 50, and Lorraine, age 55, asleep. The couple woke up to see a man dressed in all black, wearing a headlamp, armed with a gun. He tied up the couple with zip ties and quizzed them on the details of their home, including whether they had a safe, where their ATM cards were, and whether or not they had a weapon. Keys took the handgun Lorraine had kept for protection, along with their cell phones, and forced the couple to get into their own vehicle before driving them to an abandoned home he'd scouted out earlier. So he scouts out the area, then walks from his hotel to their home, does the break and enter, and then has them drive their vehicle to...
And he waited in their yard for hours and hours. This is, again, some Easter egg information. So he waited in the vicinity for a super long time because they had a neighbor who was a night owl, and the neighbor kept coming out to like let their dog out. And he sat behind their pool in their backyard and smoked a cigar and watched this neighbor for hours and just waited at this house.
And would you
Patience.
say that he would have this, yeah, this patience, like from like the hunting and living in the woods, growing up in his
I
childhood?
think he's
Like, I
a
mean,
psychopath and he loves the hunt. Loves it.
well, well, once there, he would tie Bill to a stool in the basement of the abandoned property while he left Lorraine behind in the car. And I don't know if it says it here, but Bill was a bigger guy. That ends up kind of giving him
Yes.
problems,
Bill puts up quite a fight.
which we're going to get into.
Bill
When
and
he
Lorraine
returned,
both put up quite a fight.
I'm
for
proud of them. Like I
Yeah.
like based on all this, like when he returned, he found Lorraine had escaped from the front seat of the car and was trying to run to the main road. But he tackled her and dragged her into the bedroom of the home, tying her arms and legs to the bed. Bill began to shout, asking, "Where's my wife? Where's my wife?" Callahan recounts in the book. When Keyes went down to check on him, he discovered he had worked himself partway free. That pissed me off, Keyes would later tell investigators during his confession, because there's a very specific way I want to get things done. I have the whole thing planned out. I have everything I need to do it. After discovering Bill had altered his plans, Keyes told investigators that he lost control and struck him with a shovel repeatedly before taking out a gun and fatally shooting him multiple times. Keyes returned to the bedroom where he cut Lorraine's clothes with a knife and raped her twice. During the sexual assault, Keyes strangled Lorraine to the point where she lost consciousness, Donovan said, according to 7 Days. Then he brought her down to the basement to see her husband's body. After sitting her down on a bench, he strangled her from behind with a rope, ending her life. Holy cow.
So actually, it's interesting. I'll add in a little detail about Bill broke free and like tried to charge at Keyes, and Keyes ended up shooting him over like a total of 5 times, and the guy was still fucking standing, yelling at him,
Jesus.
and then
what
finally
a beast.
died. But everyone in Keyes' stories fights him tooth and nail. Like, good for them, honestly. Yes, Bret.
And I'll find you the source, Casey. But there was also, I believe, when Keyes was going through the house before they left, the original home they broke into where they resided, that he found out that Bill had served in the same unit that he had served in the military, and that
Correct.
they were both in the military at the same. Were they in the military at the same time or different times to
No,
the same unit?
different times they'd served in the same unit, and he used this when he talked to Bill as a way of playing with his food, pretty much, to give him the idea that maybe, oh,
There's
I found
hope.
some common ground. Maybe there's hope. Maybe I'll let you live. So he did that purposefully.
Wow. So Keyes doused the bodies with Drano, then tossed them into a corner in the basement, covering them with debris before he left. It's clear from the facts of this case that, though confronted with death, Bill and Lorraine showed extraordinary bravery and extreme dedication and love for one another, Donovan said. They fought to the end. Keyes took the couple's car to a nearby parking lot, where he had already left his rental car and switched vehicles before driving off. The crime would continue to baffle investigators for months, leaving them little to go on. But the broken window into the home and no sign of the missing couple and their bodies would never be recovered.
To this day, their bodies have never been recovered by some stroke of fucking hate from the universe. The house that he left them at was demolished, and they would
were
later.
in the basement. Like,
Yeah. So literally, they just never discovered the fucking bodies in the basement. Tragic.
And they
as
just
fuck,
demolished,
right?
someone just demolished the house over the top of it, and that's it.
Yeah, so I believe that because they were in the basement, the house itself was demolished, the rubble was taken away to a landfill, and something else was either built or over the top, or it just was never built over the top. But I believe in some way their bodies were forever lost. But this will come into play later because Israel, of course, didn't know that. He thought the bodies were still there waiting to be discovered, and later used this as a tool while negotiating with investigators. So basically, if he kept his stupid mouth shut Again, this is why I don't think he's as smart as people think he is.
Right.
This is one of those major rookie mistakes that he makes, where they wouldn't even have known. They would never, ever, ever have connected him to these two if he had not given the investigators their names himself.
If you land in Chicago and then this crime's in Vermont, like, I mean, that's kind of hard to do.
Yeah, it's a long drive,
of course,
like you said.
his normal practice of attacking in one location and then taking the victims to another location, leaving very little physical evidence at the scene. Although, and unfortunately, I have seen crime scene photos of their house. It's pretty fucking sad. I just won't get into that. But now we're going to get to the story that, if you have heard of Israel Keyes, is probably the only story that you know about him, which is the tragic tale of Samantha Koenig. And I'm calling this Israel Keyes' fatal error. Dumb fuck. Breaks every rule he has and just fucks it all up in so many ways.
Aaron,
fuck this
you
guy,
can take
right?
us on this one. Yeah.
Sure. Her last name is Koenig, right? Am I pronouncing that right? Koenig?
Koenig, yes.
Koenig. All right. So the fatal error. The murder of Samantha Koenig would be Israel Keyes' last kill. And it was right in his own backyard. Keyes lived in Anchorage with his 10-year-old daughter and his girlfriend Kimberly, and he never before killed so close to home. Shortly after 7 p.m. on February 1st, Israel Keyes pulled his white Chevrolet pickup out of the driveway and drove to Home Depot on Tudor Road, 15 minutes away. He had made the same drive at the same time several different days that week, curious about the comings and goings at the Common Grounds kiosk. After several evenings of observation, Keyes decided to rob it. Even though the kiosk sat alongside a highly trafficked main road, there had been such heavy snowfall that the shack was obscured behind 5-foot snow drifts. The night was cold and extremely dark. He would wait until near closing time, when there he would probably be no other customers. Keyes parked in the Home Depot lot, close to an IHOP, grabbed his coffee mug and a pair of plastic zip ties, his headlamp, and his .22 Taurus revolver. He wore a tiny police scanner in his ear. Keyes got out of his truck, crossed the street to the kiosk. He couldn't see who was working inside, but he figured it was a young woman. Most of these kiosks were staffed with teenage girls working alone. Bad call on their part. Whoever was in... Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to put this in here. I guess if this is a very common thing, or at the time in Anchorage and parts of Alaska, these like little coffee huts being around with like little drive-throughs that you could pull up, like basically a little kiosk. And and they would have like bikini baristas and things like that.
In the summer or like the warmer times, they would have the
sense.
girls wear bikinis and serve coffee and shit. And now, of course, since this incident, now the girls work in pairs, which so much safer.
I'm sorry, someone like this, it might not be that much safer. It would just be too.
I mean, again, though, Anchorage is just not used to this kind of crime at all.
Right, this is the devil inside. So whoever was inside didn't seem to have a car. There wasn't one parked nearby. So Keyes walks up to the kiosk at 5 minutes to 8, just before closing, stood at the large open window, which he knew had no plexiglass, no protection, not even a screen. He put down his empty thermos and asked the barista for an Americano. Now he had a good look. She was young, small, pretty, alone. Her name was Samantha Koenig. As she moved back and forth from the window to the espresso machine in the tiny space, about 3 feet wide, Keyes began silently running through his plan. Now there was a hitch. Someone was subtly sitting in a nearby car, engine idling, watching him. It made what he wanted to do all the more challenging. Samantha handed him the Americano, and Keyes pulled out his gun. "This is a robbery," he said. Samantha put her hands in the air. He could tell she was terrified. "Turn off the lights," Keyes said. Samantha moved to the back of the kiosk and switched off the lights, then returned to the window. She didn't scream. "Give me all the cash in the register," Keyes said. Samantha stiffly moved toward the right of the window where the register sat hidden from customers. She emptied the drawer and handed the money over. "Get down on the floor," he said, and she did. Keyes was still outside the kiosk. He told Samantha to turn off the lights and the open sign, which also she did. He watched Samantha while scanning the parking lot. Whoever was in that idling car finally pulled away and drove off. It was quiet now, just the soft whoosh of the cars going back and forth on Tudor Road. Keyes told Samantha to get down on her knees and turn around at the window. Once again, she did. He leaned over, binding her wrists behind her back with the zip ties. He told Samantha to move out of the way, then jumped inside. He moved his headlamp over the countertop and spotted a set of keys. Where's your car? He asks. I don't have one, Samantha said, but my dad's coming to get me in half an hour. I mean, he's coming to be here any minute. Keys had second thoughts. He couldn't tell which was true. Did you hit the alarm? Keys said. Don't lie to me. I have a police scanner in my ear. I'll know. No, she said. If I hear the police being dispatched here, he said, I will kill you. I didn't, Samantha said. I swear. He said he asked her what her name was. Then she shut the windows, barred them, took some napkins, and stuffed them in her mouth. Then he told her they were going to go for a walk. As Keys led Samantha through the parking lot, he found a new Canon camera on the ground, which had to be worth $300. That's super random.
So he took that, according to the story, he took that as a good omen or a stroke of luck, and he made a big deal about that to the investigators. It had to be worth like $300. It was just like brand new, and I took that as a good sign that I was doing the right thing, basically.
Man, that's super random to find something in a parking lot like that.
And then 5-foot snowdrifts, like.
Yeah, that's also a bit random. All right, so he bent over to pick it up. Samantha, feeling his distraction, broke away and ran. Keys regained control of Samantha quickly by pressing his .22 against her ribs. The gun was small, light, easy to conceal, but most of all, it was quiet. You could shoot someone on a busy street and no one would hear a thing. Keys knew what he was doing. He threatened to kill her if she tried again. Samantha nodded. Keys told her to stumble around a little, lean against him like she was drunk. He took her across Tudor Road and walked her through the Home Depot lot to his truck at the IHOP. A few people, he said, were lingering near the car parked in front of Keys' vehicles. Now he had to rely on Samantha's fear to paralyze her. In a way, the first escape attempt worked to his advantage. He moved Samantha to the passenger door as though he was chivalrously opening it, leaned down and whispered in her ear, I don't want to hurt you, he said, but this .22 is loaded and very quiet ammo. I will kill you, so don't make me do it. As Keys opened the door and began clearing out his cluttered passenger seat, he hadn't planned on using his own truck. Samantha silently watched these strangers just feet from her climber into their car and drive away. That had to suck for her at that point in this whole situation.
And as you're listening to this story, keep a mental tally of all the close calls that occur, all the times where one tiny little thing could have, like, I think so far we're up to like 3 or 4, where something could have changed.
You zigged instead of zagged, you know? Like, it's just...
Really, honestly, there's so many times. I think by the end of the story, the FBI did this, and there's like 13 what they called close calls where things nearly went wrong for him. So fucking many. But one of the controversies here is he told investigators in his own words, of course. I was clearing shit out of the way. I hadn't planned on using my own car. But he had also prepared for the abduction by removing the, there's like a giant metal rack designed to carry ladders that was mounted on the back of his truck that he'd taken off, and he also removed the license plates from his truck. So it kind of sounded like maybe he was prepared for the abduction. Brett, go ahead.
In one of our previous episodes, Military Bonus Show, we talked about a PACE plan. Whether this is saying the military and him being ex-military, you have your plan of action or the way that you want to go to something. But a PACE plan is you have your primary plan, an alternate plan, a contingency plan, an emergency plan. So really quick on the fly, you can audible. First plan's falling through, you switch to your alternate, then your contingency. And by him having to use his own vehicle, he had a PACE plan. He had a contingency or an emergency option. You know,
I mean, I've never seen anyone with any government affiliation work in even such a way that one plan is together. So, I mean, yes, he had taken some steps to plan, but at the same time, as you can see, there are infinite mistakes that he makes throughout the story, as well as other people, which ultimately lead to his downfall. So I'll pick up from there with we're going to see some more close calls coming up. Keys drives out of the parking lot with his victim now. Minutes later, after he stopped at a red light, a police car pulls up directly next to Samantha with 2 officers inside. This is close call number 5 or 6? What were the chances of this? Keys picked this part of Anchorage on this night because there was a huge festival going on across town, and he knew from his scanner that almost all the police were over there. Keys watched Samantha silently work out her options. What should she do? If she started screaming or banging her head against the window or even tried to wrest herself free and the cops pulled away before seeing her, there was a chance Israel would kill her. The cops next to her had their windows all the way up. Dispatches were constantly coming over their radio. dispatchers, which her abductor was hearing in real time in his ear. So maybe she should go along with what he wanted. Keyes, too, was assessing the risks. That same scanner told him that these officers weren't looking for a missing teenage girl. If Samantha tried something, and really, he thought at this moment she should, and the cops pulled him over, well, he had his gun. But if he stayed calm and just sat at the light, if he was able to control Samantha here without saying a word, this night would surely go as planned. The light turned green, the patrol car drove away, and Samantha watched its red taillights dwindle in the darkness.
Damn.
That's got to be rough.
God, that one.
I couldn't imagine.
That part broke my heart. I was like, God.
I couldn't imagine what's going through her mind at this point. I mean, the fear,
dude.
And he's a big guy too. I mean, wiry and lean, but I mean, he's a big guy, and she's what, like a teenage girl, like
I believe she's 5'4" or something like that. But
yeah.
Keyes was thinking about what to do next. His 10-year-old daughter was probably asleep, but his girlfriend Kimberly was a night owl. He drove Samantha to a park near his house, where they waited for some time. During this time, there were other details where Samantha's trying to talk to him and tell him, hey, my family doesn't have any money. You know, because now he has implied to her that he's going to hold her for ransom, right? And she's like, my family doesn't have any money. They're really poor. And he says something along the lines of, oh, don't you worry about that. In situations like this, they'll come up with the money. They'll find, like, they'll get the money. And then at one point, she asks him if she can use the bathroom, and he ends up, like, putting a rope on her neck and letting her use the bathroom like a fucking dog, because he doesn't want her to urinate in his car and get DNA all over his car. That was what he told investigators later. So now it's closing in on 11 p.m. They're waiting at this park near the house.
About it being 11 p.m., it says that it was shortly after 7 p.m. that he approached the kiosk. So this is like 4 hours later. Like, is he like the only guy where, you know, his girlfriend's not sure keeping tabs on him? Like, well, what are you doing? Or why are you gone for 4 hours? Like,
so again, this is one of the many, many small things that I guess I left out of the outline for the sake of being concise. But he and his girlfriend had an arrangement of sorts where they'd made it very clear from the beginning, or Israel, I suppose, had made it very clear from the beginning, my time is my time, and thou shalt not bother me in the slightest when I'm on my time. So for some reason, this was just something that she was very used to, was him fucking off into oblivion for untold amounts of time with absolutely no explanation, and
like
there was no...
away. Like flying to the lower 48, and like, I mean...
Those things he did under the guise of traveling for work, for construction. And he did have legitimate construction jobs in the lower 48 frequently, but obviously it wasn't always for those reasons. And then sometimes he would make up... money. He would sometimes make up friends in those locations that he was visiting, or X number of excuses.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to sidetrack you. I just see like 4 hours, 5 hours missing time, you know, and I just think a girlfriend would be like, hey, where you at, honey? You know, like, that's just kind of odd to me.
It just seems strange that after all of this shit that he's done and all the precautions he's taken in his own backyard, in his own vehicle, and now he's taking her to his own house, which is something he's never done before.
Yeah.
He's breaking every single one of his own rules in this situation, which is why he gets caught, obviously. This is his hometown. This is where he works. This is where he lives with his family. You're shitting in your own bed. He is shitting in his own bed hardcore. So, again, it's closing in at 11 p.m. He's been driving around with her, just waiting for time to pass. So, using Samantha's phone during this time, which he had... So, again, notes that I didn't put in here. He's unraveling. This motherfucker is unraveling. He literally drives back to the kiosk after kidnapping her to get her phone and keys. Okay, so that's close call now. We're like on 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So he drives back to the kiosk again, leaves her in his car by herself, goes to the kiosk, which is... We'll touch on that later, because police just never watch the surveillance video very thoroughly, so they don't even see him coming back to the kiosk until much, much later. This is when he barricades the window and kind of tidies up a bit to make it look like there's no robbery, and closes the door, takes her stuff, gets back in the car, drives back to his house. Again, there's just so many times in here where he was making mistakes, and there's more mistakes he makes before this night is over. So he grabs her phone and sent text messages to people who had been calling her for the past few hours. One was to her boyfriend, and one was to her boss. He wrote as though Samantha was pissed off, continuing because he'd scrolled through her messages and seen that she and her boyfriend were fighting, right? So he sends her boyfriend from her phone a very cryptic message about, like, I know what you did, fuck you, I'm so pissed, acting weird, gonna be gone for a while, tell my dad, because her boyfriend lives with her and her dad. And then she later sent him a second text, or I'm sorry, Israel Keys on Samantha's phone sent another text message to the boyfriend just saying, F you. And then a text to the boss saying something about, I'm not going to be in, or I'm leaving early, something like that. And then he pulls the battery out of the phone, which was his thing. So he sends these really strange text messages from her phone in really strange, another mistake, because he doesn't write the way that she would write, because he could just scroll back through her text and see how she texts and copy that. Instead, he writes in some weird... Yeah, he writes in this weird abbreviated, no punctuation, like... He just writes a very strange text message that anyone who received it would immediately be like, what?
Yeah.
And then pulls the battery out of the phone. So, finally, Keys drives home and pulls into his driveway. It's around midnight now, freezing cold, yet there were still people out, like neighbors walking their dogs. Keys would still have to wait some more. It's close to 2 a.m. when Keys got the nerve to get Samantha out of the truck and walk her over to the shed in his backyard. I actually believe, after listening to Keys' interview, the shed that he used was probably the one in the front yard.
Really?
I'll get into that later. I know, which makes it even somehow scarier. But who knows? Maybe he had more than one shed in his backyard.
It's pretty brazen.
I'll make you comfortable, he told her. You just sit here. But I'm going to have this police scanner on me, so if I hear reports of screaming from this neighborhood or anything, any disturbance from over here, I'm going to be back here before the cops. Some pretty classic tactics there as far as fear and manipulation go. He does not say, if you do XYZ, then I will kill you. He leaves these vague, open threats. For example, when he left her in the kiosk, when he left her in the car on his second return to the kiosk to get her phone, he had made some comment to her like, if you try to get away or anything, I'm not going to be happy, is what he said. And the wording is important, I think, because, again, it just shows his experience in doing shit like this. An amateur person might say, if you do XYZ, then I will kill you. These open-ended threats are way more terrifying to someone in this kind of psychological distress and more effective.
Like a horror movie, like your imagination takes over.
Correct. It's exactly the implication versus the direct threat. Because if you say, if you do this, then I will kill you, well, you know what happens if you do this, right? But if you say, I'm not going to be happy, then you're sitting there, well, what does that mean? What is he going to do to me? And your brain takes over and starts imagining things for you. So he says, I'm going to be back here before the cops. Samantha had every reason to believe him. He turned his radio way up, heavy metal, drowning out any noise she could possibly make. He took a piece of rope.
Midnight, blasting heavy metal.
Yeah,
apparently this was not weird to the neighbors in any way.
Yeah.
Good for you, buddy, out there doing crazy shit in the middle of the night.
That neighbor.
Yeah.
So Israel takes a piece of rope, ties it around her neck, and screws it into the wall on both sides. He moved her hands so that they were in front of her and told her to chill out. I will also point out that I did not put in here, at multiple points during this night, to include when they were at the park, he gave her... He says to investigators, I let her smoke, like share a cigar with him. But her hands were tied behind her back, so he's pretty much just like forcing her to smoke. And then same thing in the shed. He said, I put her hands in front of her so she could smoke. Weird as shit. Next, more stupid mistakes he's making now. He tells Samantha to give him her home address and the location and description of the truck she shared with her boyfriend, Dwayne. Don't know if that's really his name. There's so many like alternate names used in here. The ATM card which they shared, so Samantha and Dwayne, was in the truck, either in the glove box or tucked into a visor. Keys then goes back into his house, checks on Kimberly, who's now finally asleep. And in just 2.5 hours, Keys and his daughter were due to leave for the airport to go on a 2-week-long vacation.
Wow.
And he's got a chick tied up in his shed. Keys called for a ride to the airport at 5 a.m. sharp. So the question becomes, what could he have done to Samantha, leaving behind no evidence of any kind before stealing her ATM card, showering, changing clothes, waking his daughter, feeding her breakfast, making sure she was packed, and getting to the airport with his girlfriend staying behind, ostensibly none the wiser? We're gonna find out.
That's a fucking magic act to make that all work.
It gets so much worse, dude. So, I'm torn on even saying this because the general consensus is that this investigation on the legal side of things was an absolute fucking train wreck from start to finish. I kind of like Keys in this situation. Keys is kind of a train wreck, but he's still kind of accomplishing things. It's the same thing with the police. They make some really weird rookie mistakes, but it's not as bad as many stories have led it to believe. Again, initially they allegedly refused help from local FBI, like right off the bat. Their biggest failing to me is their failure to obtain and watch surveillance video. That to me is just fucking wild and inexcusable. When they do get surveillance video, they watch the robbery and then say, okay, thanks, have a great day. And they don't watch any more of the video to include the part where Keys comes back to the kiosk. Like, they also do not attempt to acquire surveillance video from surrounding businesses for quite a while, which is a huge failing. Yes.
Well, as law enforcement,
A-aron.
let me ask you, you get this call, you go to this kiosk, you're busy, your town's busy, you're Alaskan police. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. And you watch this robbery situation. Instinctually, in law enforcement, are you going to continue to watch the video to see if anything else happened 20 minutes later, 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, however long it might have been?
The detectives absolutely would be watching all the, even if it's on fast forward, all the way through.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So for
you
me,
as law enforcement.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as a patrol officer, again, apparently Anchorage is just not that high crime. Is what I've learned or been led to believe. So maybe they're just not super used to this kind of thing. And again, the police failings are not quite, after me personally reading through the documents and looking at the times and dates on these documents, I don't believe the police failing was as bad as it was initially portrayed. There were some huge ones. Like, for example, if I, a patrol officer, respond to that kiosk to investigate a missing person, as soon as I see the robbery on the surveillance video, we're entering that person, we're putting out a BOLA, we're taking all those immediate steps to document a kidnapping. From there, a detective will take over the case and dedicate quite a bit more time and resources to this, including watching the entire video past what I've probably seen. If a detective doesn't do that, one must ask, why the fuck not? Well, that's just pretty common.
Could this be that small town Alaskan concept? I grew up in a small town, small town police department. Like, okay, it's robbery. I know you'll get into more on the victim itself and her past, but just as a whole, is it maybe just because they're not necessarily incompetent, but more like sleepy, like that sleepy
It's definitely possible. It could just be a matter of inexperience for sure. I can't think of another excuse, to be honest with you.
No, so I was just trying to kind of put on the page of why they would have screwed up so royally in something like this.
Know.
But I mean, like I said, small town,
So let's go into a little bit more detail, including some of the things that I read when I was reading through all my FBI notes. So there's quite a few claims about the police during the situation. I kind of wanted to see if any, I don't really care if they fucked up, they probably did, or if they didn't, but I kind of wanted to know for sure. Because everyone likes to claim the police fuck up, and sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. But I wanted to know for sure. So I did review NCIC entries and a memo from the... NCIC is a United States national database. I think I mentioned this in the Kenny Veach episode. Responding to a missing person would be required to place that person into NCIC as a missing person before even clearing the call and attach a printout of that. And the NCIC entry was released with those unsealed FBI files. And there was also a memo in there from the Anchorage Police Department, which formally requested FBI assistance with the case on the 3rd of February. I'm sorry, 2012. I put 21, like an idiot. Which is less than 48 hours, give or take, from the time Samantha was kidnapped. Per their own records, she was reported missing sometime on the 1st. I don't know how that's possible. By her father, which implies that her father or boyfriend called the same night she disappeared. Don't know how that's possible. Because she was still fighting with her boyfriend. I believe that maybe she was formally
or maybe
reported on the 2nd.
Or maybe they noticed that the text messages were weird, like you said earlier.
Well, we do know that the boyfriend went to pick her up that night at about 8:30, missing Israel Keys by how many minutes?
Yeah, another
and
close
looked
call.
into the window.
They could have passed each other on Trudeau Road, for all they know. Like,
probably. So there is a pervasive belief that the local FBI, or that a local FBI agent offered help to APD, which was refused. However, there is a memo from the 8th that documents a local unnamed PI, a private investigator, who had been repeatedly calling the APD with a suspect name and was frustrated by what he perceived as lack of follow-up per his watching the news, basically. Another very similar report to this is documented on the 13th of February. There's no records. And I mean, the documents that are released include tips from psychics offering to help. So, I mean,
really?
Literally, there's people who are like, I'm telepathic, so I can, if you want help, question the suspect. And this is in a formal FBI document included in these unsealed FBI files. So this is what's documented versus what is claimed. So I'm seeing a pretty prompt response, but who knows? There could be some truth to this, but what I saw in the documents seems to indicate that they responded quite quickly, and they did get the FBI involved very quickly. So on the morning of February 2nd, 2012, and I think this is probably when she was actually formally reported, one of Samantha's coworkers at Common Grounds entered the kiosk and noticed Samantha had not put things away properly from the night before. A number of espresso utensils were unwashed, and there were cups and napkins strewn about the place. Then the coworker noticed the cash register had been completely emptied. The employee called the owner of the coffee shop, who reviewed footage and called the police. And the owner of the coffee shop was, I believe, in Oregon at the time he's getting this call.
Different part of the continent. Like,
yes. So then it's the owner of the coffee shop who calls police and says, hey, there was a robbery at my kiosk last night. Please go look at it. I'm not in town, but I'll get there as soon as I can. And here's the footage. So initially, police start to suspect that Samantha had possibly stolen the money and scampered away somewhere with her friends. Because of Samantha's past drug abuse history, to include cocaine and marijuana and allegedly meth, for which she was in recovery, they assumed the young woman had just relapsed and she was possibly off somewhere on a bender after she'd had that fight with her boyfriend. This was later verified by the boyfriend, who described arriving to pick Samantha up, like I told you, and observing through the window the mess, admitted that he and Samantha had been fighting, along with the misleading text messages, which seemed to verify that she'd gotten mad at him and kind of fucked off, gotten a ride from a friend.
Right.
When police...
That's not weird.
...finally review... I mean... It's really not, honestly. It's not that weird. It's tough. It's tough because your first theory isn't serial killer. It's fight with the boyfriend.
Having a fight and, you know, like the chick's like pissed off, you know. And
yeah, but what boyfriend's going to be like, oh, she got a ride with somebody else? Like, you're talking jealous high school people. Like, I don't know. That one, he seems a bit off.
That's a fair point, too.
Yeah, it seems a bit off.
Yeah, super weird that he wasn't concerned. Or maybe they just had a really toxic relationship and this was par for the course. But who knows?
That sucks. Poor girl.
This is where it gets a little weird. When police finally reviewed the grainy security camera footage from the coffee kiosk on the 3rd, all they saw was Samantha talking to someone at the drive-thru window before turning off the lights and the man jumping inside. Initially, the police assumed this was Samantha's friend, an accomplice, or a drug dealer. Police initially overlooked, supposedly, don't know, they're definitely not going to document it if they did overlook this, but they supposedly overlooked Samantha putting up her hands, a man at the window out of view, and once the lights in the kiosk were out, they didn't see the gun. So the drug theory, to be fair, again, this is kind of a push-pull situation, was kind of super supported by interviews with several of Samantha's friends, who also thought it was likely she was on a drug binge, and a number of hours were wasted chasing up this theory. I don't think they were really wasted. Police followed leads regarding Samantha's connection with drug dealers, people who were allegedly robbing those drug dealers, and people who were conducting grow-ops within local residential houses. Now, this comes from my research through the FBI files. Samantha's boyfriend and her father, they were actually operating a marijuana grow in their home, which was later discovered during a search warrant execution by APD, and there was quite a bit of what detectives outright called drug drama surrounding the pair. This included plans, which were both planned and executed, to steal marijuana from suppliers under the ruse of a robbery, and then suspicion that Samantha's kidnapping might be some form of payback for these shenanigans. And there's a lot. I can't even say they wasted their time, and I read through a shit ton of these rabbit trails that the PD chased following these concepts, because so many people were telling them, oh, this might be because of this drug drama and that rip and that lick and this and that, and on it went. Days turned into weeks, and the police finally began to entertain other theories. Meanwhile, Samantha's father began to make public appeals and drum up public support for his missing daughter. He was also deeply angered that she was being written off as a junkie and a thief. A vigil was held, which hundreds of people attended. The story of Samantha's disappearance started to make it into national news. So again, more research notes here. While initially misguided, of course, there was nothing unusual or negligent in the investigation during this time period that I could observe, besides the obvious failure to thoroughly examine the video surveillance from the coffee shack all the way through. Don't know who dropped that ball. Interviews with family and friends are fraught with red herrings, and police seem to be doing their due diligence by following each trail to exhaustion, as we would in any investigation of this kind. Furthermore, FBI files indicate really strange, uncooperative, and erratic behavior by Samantha's father. At one point, he even got into a threatening altercation with a local woman who was trying to raise money for Samantha by selling t-shirts with her face on them. Like, supposedly half that money was supposed to go into Samantha's ransom fund. He, tracked her down and made a death threat against her. There was some crazy shit going on. He was really uncooperative with police. They'd call and say, hey, can you meet us? He's like, I don't want to meet you there. I'll meet you over here, and then never show up.
And this guy was like the, ex-felon, Hells Angels type.
Yeah.
So at this point,
Yes,
Keys has basically hit the I'm the luckiest killer on the planet lottery. I mean, like you said, 14, 15 occurrences. And then you get this where obviously they're not even really looking at it as something bad because they feel that she's a junkie. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've all seen TV and movies, whether it's true or not, that kind of happens in that world. Like, oh, we know her, she's a junkie, whatever. So he kind of hit the lottery here, and yet
he did.
It still gets a little fuzzy.
Her dad is not helping in any way. He's actually, there's a whole lot of drama as well where he misappropriated the ransom money the money that he raised later for what would be her ransom fund. He misappropriated and used basically for himself. There's all sorts of drama happening that would, of course, lead police to suspect these guys, because usually, if I'm going to a missing person who I suspect has been kidnapped, the last person on the planet I'm going to suspect is a fucking total stranger. That's just statistics. I'm looking at romantic partners first, family members next, friends next. If there's drugs involved, that's a huge lead. Brett, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we get into this next part about the ransom photo, he had only a few hours, so he had to have his daughter ready, and he was going on a 2-week trip. I believe that his girlfriend is going to meet them on later, due to her work arrangements. At what point did he end the life of Samantha Koenig? Was that before he left, or that part I kind of, or unless I just missed that in the transition, because I know we're about to go on the ransom photo, and I believe that there's some concern about the proof of life.
Yes, so I didn't want to brush over this in a paragraph, so we are going to dig into detail later through Israel's own words after his apprehension about what he did to her, but he in the 2.5 hours between putting her in the shed and taking his daughter to a Disney cruise, wherever the fuck they were going, he did rape and strangle Samantha, and then decide that he still wanted to go for the ransom bit when he got back. Keeping in mind 2 weeks. So 2 weeks later, after killing her, with her body in his shed, while APD is tracking down drug dealers and Israel's on a cruise, now he decides he wants ransom money.
And February in Alaska, I'm assuming it's cold enough with a detached shed to keep this body from decomposing and smelling.
That's what Israel later tells investigators, that he was not worried about it. It's 20 degrees out there. Body's going to be fine. Did not seem concerned at all that his girlfriend was just at home while he was in another state with his kid, and his body was in the shed.
Wow.
So we are going to get into details of her death later. We're not going to skip that completely, unfortunately, but we're going to talk about, we're trying to make this as chronological as possible and then bring what happened to her in Israel's own words.
So for this ransom photo, Israel Keys returned to Alaska on the weekend of February 18th, so this is 2 weeks later, and spent a Saturday and Sunday with his daughter. Then on the following Monday, when his daughter was at school and his girlfriend was at work, the man went out to the shed. He pulled Samantha Koenig's frozen body out of the cabinet, unrolled it from the blood-soaked tarp, and proceeded to defrost the body with the two space heaters and a blow dryer. Allegedly, he then proceeded to have sex with the corpse, and so we can go ahead and add necrophiliac to the list given above.
Let me step in there. It's super hard to confirm whether that's true or not. It kind of seems like it's true now. I was originally leaning towards it was not true, but I actually do believe it's true now after listening to interviews. So, sorry. I was really trying to find a way to disprove that happened, but I think it did happen.
I think it happened, okay.
Keys painted the body's face with thick globs of makeup to hide the pallid color that came from the freezing and the exsanguination. He braided the corpse's hair. That word. He braided the corpse's hair. He tried to superglue the eyelids open, but failed. Instead, he sewed the eyes open using a curved needle and a fishing line. Oh my God. He placed a layer of duct tape over the mouth and around the back of the head to hold the now drooping, defrosted skin in place and to conceal the fact that the young woman was dead. He then held up the February 13th copy of the Anchorage Daily News and took a Polaroid of the girl, whom he hoped the authorities would believe was still alive. This effectively gave the man an alibi since he was out of town from February 2nd to February 17th. That's a smart move. As a point of interest, the FBI never released. Go ahead, Aaron.
No, I was just going to say it's smart and stupid at the same time.
I mean, because he's on the cruise and he's doing a proof of life or attempting to do a proof of life photo about halfway through his trip where he's not even there. You know what I mean? Even though it is, to me, that's some foresight. That's playing chess with checkers.
Yeah, good point.
In my opinion.
I mean, playing chess with checkers would have been disposing of her body and not trying to do this whole ransom circus.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, it was smart, but
he didn't need the money.
He didn't need the money. Why was he doing this? Why the fuck did he do this?
Yeah, why did you open the door? Like, at this point, you've got to be back in town. You see that there's nothing going on that's drawing you to the body. So why are you reaching out and trying for more?
Or maybe that he was to a certain point with the rushes that he would get from these things, how you do like bank robberies to calm down, like that maybe that he needed some other things to try to, shock his system.
I personally do believe, like I've mentioned before, that we are watching him unravel as far as his urges go. We are watching things start to not be enough for him, not scratch that itch. We are watching his psyche unravel during this particular crime.
That's what I'm saying. Like his tolerance level, he's become numb to. He's got to switch it up a little bit, try to get whatever he's getting out of it.
Yeah.
As a point of interest, the FBI have never released this photograph, and the one which is circulated around the internet is a mock-up from a true crime show that aired in the United States. I mention this in case the more morbid of you decide you want to look at it or look it up, or in case...
Ignore that part.
Okay.
Ignore that.
Your notes here. Using an old typewriter, Israel wrote a ransom note. He demanded $30,000 be deposited into Samantha's bank account so he could withdraw the money. He mentioned that he may not use the debit card much in Alaska due to the fact the state had a small population and thus a smaller pool of suspects, but wrote that he would be leaving soon and would use the card for multiple occasions. As a form of misdirection, the killer mentioned that Samantha tried to get away twice, once outside Common Grounds, which I believe that's the name of the coffee kiosk,
Correct.
and again, quote, in the desert. Finally, he wrote that once the $30,000 had been fully withdrawn, between 6 months to a year later, the man would text the coordinates of an information packet, which would contain all the details required to find Samantha's location. Yeah, 6 months to a year is a long time.
So,
like to pay for your
again, this
Yeah.
is super weird to me because he uses the second fake. Obviously, there was no, she didn't try to get away in the desert because he never had her in the desert. He just used that as misdirection. But then he proceeds to later on go on to use this card in the desert. So why did he do this? Why did he do this to himself? It's almost like I don't know what the fuck is happening with this guy right now. Like, he's never done any of these things before. We've talked about his criminal history before. None of this shit. This toying with authorities, this ransom bullshit, his own backyard, his own home, his own vehicle. He's never done any of these things before. What is it that snapped in this man's mind?
It almost sounds like he wants to get caught. Like
It
he's
kind of
literally just. Mm-hmm.
Weird, right?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah.
Or he's burnt out and wants to go out a legend, which he kind of did a little bit.
Not to be rude in the serial killer world, but even if your body count is 11, you're not going out as a legend.
But I'm saying only
Especially-
recovering one body and the way that he went about this.
I
True,
don't
but I mean, he studied
Stands out.
serial killers like Bundy and stuff like
Right.
that, and he had a fascination for it. The body count is a big part of being a serial killer, is it not?
It's really funny because, like, at one point during one of his interviews, he tells the police, the FBI, he's like, "Oh, I really like this one novel. It gave me a bunch of ideas, and it was like a Dean Koontz novel that was like pretty fucking generic." And they read through it, and there was like no similarities in there at all to him. And they're like, "Did we just waste our time reading a shitty novel?" Like,
Just send him off in some random goose chase. Here, check this book out.
I'm more interested, not necessarily. I get what you're saying about the body count, to be at the epicenter of serial killers. But
Well, I mean, I'm not a serial killer. I don't know. I'm just asking.
But I think what I'm saying is like, yeah, he may not have the body count as high as we know, or even there's missing bodies, but just the efficiency. That bodies have not been found or kill kits have not been located. For what he did.
Is that
I
a
will
thing
say-
for serial killers that, like, if they can commit crimes without being noticed at all? Like, because
Yes.
he seems like he kind of wants to be noticed here at this point. So, like, is he
So
like,
that's
bored with it?
something I go back and forth on. I will say by the end of all of my research on this motherfucker, I don't believe that notoriety was really in any way his goal at any point. In fact,
Okay.
he pretty much goes above and beyond to avoid that. Now, in this instance, I believe he's getting his first taste of notoriety, and it gets to him. I think he's finally realizing what it is and how it feels, and suddenly he kind of gets swept up in it a little, like against his will. I firmly believe that we have to look at everything he does and his motivations, because it's so easy to sit there and be like, why would somebody do this? Through the lenses of what motivates this type of animal. He's a psychopath, first of all, so we can't assume that we know he has any emotional investment in anything happening at any point. And if he does, it's a purely animal instinct, survival type gratification. Secondly, we know that he's been pretty firmly diagnosed as a sexually motivated serial killer. So the things that he's doing are to bring him sexual gratification, and in that process, he's killing someone, right, and committing acts of violence.
Right.
That's
So we
his
have
kink.
to assume that he's chasing his kinks with the way he does stuff. The preparation, the laying the trap. He's setting himself up to be this great hunter. He also clearly really loves terrifying his prey. That's one of his, quote, you could kind of funnel it down and call it a kink. but it's something that excites him. And you have to understand that psychopaths are easily bored because they don't feel emotions like the rest of us do. Boredom comes upon them very quickly. They lose interest in things. Things don't bring them pleasure or fun or sadness in the same way that normal people do. So it's very common for people who have psychopathic tendencies or are diagnosed formally with psychopathy to become bored easily and quickly and seek out often increasingly strange or violent ways to fix that boredom. So in his case, you have to think, what is it he wants? He's sexually motivated. So the things that he's doing, the patterns he's establishing, can only then be explained if they satisfy that sexual craving for him, right?
Okay.
The hunt is what does it for him.
I can get that.
So,
but I mean, also at the same time, when any male or to be sexually motivated, but that just spurs his crimes.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that just the male species as a whole? Aren't we all just for everything?
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right. But
that's really that and food.
So if you imagine that serial killers are 1% of the population, sexually motivated serial killers as a title are 1% of that 1%, is how they've been described.
So they're
that
few and far
classification
between.
is incredibly rare. Yes. And they're generally, I mean, this is an organized serial killer, but his motivation, strictly speaking, like if you look at Ted Bundy, and quite a few serial killers love the notoriety, love to talk about their crimes. Does this guy love to talk? Does he see himself as some kind of godlike creature? For sure. But he clearly isn't here to brag about his crimes. Yes, he talks about them in a strange sense of apathy because he's a psychopath. But every single bit of information the FBI gets out of him, I swear to God, it's like pulling teeth. Pulling fucking teeth, guys. Oh my God, if you've listened to even one of his interviews, it's so frustrating.
I've listened to some of the FBI interviews, and it drags on and on and on. It is terrible. And then he chuckles to himself and
he laughs so much,
and it's weird. It's very strange.
So I'll take it from here so we can move through this a little bit, because we're gonna get more into all this shit, I swear. He dismembers Samantha Koenig's body into 5 pieces, goes to Matanuska Lake, frozen over at that time of year, builds an ice fishing hut, drills a hole into the ice, and spends 2 days dropping the pieces of the corpse into the water, uncovered, wrapped with a cord, and sent down to the bottom with lead fishing weights. He proceeds to continue to fish at the exact same spot and take the fish home to cook and feed to his family.
Oh.
Yeah.
Love this guy. Yeah.
No.
Dude, yeah. So, he's continuing with his ransom shenanigans. For what reason? Fucking might never know. On Friday, February 24th at 7:45 p.m., Israel sends a text message to Samantha's father, which reads, "Connor Park sign under pic of Albert, ain't she purty?" The pic of Albert is in reference to a lost dog poster for Albert the Golden Doodle, which is located in a local Anchorage park. Under the poster, on the ground, was a Ziploc bag containing the ransom note and a black and white copy of Samantha's fake proof of life photo. There is some disagreement among Anchorage police and FBI investigators about whether Samantha was alive in the photo. Her blank stare and odd expression convinced a minority of investigators that they were looking at a corpse. An FBI snuff film analyst was called into the investigation, but they could not reach a conclusion based on the single black and white photograph. So, at the FBI's behest, James, in case we haven't mentioned his name, James Koenig, who is Samantha's father, that's why it's so frustrating his stupid name's redacted in all the FBI files, because we know he's James. James deposits a portion of this $30,000 ransom money, which I don't believe he even had close to this amount available in his ransom fund because he'd been misappropriating funds, but it's another story. So he deposits $5,000 into the bank account, and on February 29th at nearly midnight, $500 is withdrawn from an ATM in Anchorage. Police arrive at the scene shortly after the culprit leaves the area. The ATM camera shows grainy footage of a masked man. Then, just after midnight on March 3rd, another $500 is withdrawn from an Anchorage ATM. The small withdrawal amounts were due to the daily limit placed on the debit card. 4 days later, on March 7th, $400 is withdrawn over 3,500 miles south in Wilcox, Arizona at 9:57 p.m. Again, makes jokes about her escaping the desert and then goes to the desert. So smart, guys. Couple hours
Calling
later, near
shots.
midnight, he tries to withdraw another $400 from the ATM in Lordsburg, New Mexico, but fails due to the daily limit, so wound up only taking out another $80. It was clear now that the man was driving hundreds of miles to keep the authorities off his scent. For shock value, I did add in the fake murder photo. It's not real, guys, don't worry. And then we're going to get to apprehension and finally Israel's confession about those 2.5 missing hours. Hey, A-aron, you want to take the apprehension?
Sure. All right. So 2 days later, on March 9th, 2012, at 11:23 p.m., the man made a $483 withdrawal from a bank in Humble City, Texas. This time, in the camera footage from the ATM, police identified a white Ford Focus as the man's vehicle. Texas authorities were immediately alerted to be on the lookout for such a vehicle in connection with the kidnapping. Meanwhile, Samantha's killer attended his sister's wedding in Wells, Texas. A few days later at 11 a.m. on March 13th, a highway patrolman spotted a white Ford Focus parked at the Quality Inn Hotel in Lufkin, Texas. Police in Texas had already been alerted about a white Ford Focus in connection with a kidnapping in Anchorage, Alaska. The highway patrolman observed the car from a distance, then noted a tall man in his 30s get into the vehicle and depart. At 11:45 a.m., the patrolman pulled the car over for going 2 miles over the speed limit. The officer inspected the man's driver's license. It was issued in Anchorage, Alaska. It was at this point that the patrolman felt fairly confident that he had found the man that they were looking for. FBI agent Ganaway set out with a Texas Ranger toward Lufkin, Texas, to observe the arrest and inspect the vehicle. In the rental car, police found a pair of woman's pink panties, a gun, and also the ski mask and white tennis shoes worn by the suspect on the ATM footage. A batch of transgender porn, rolls of cash stained by a dye pack, and Samantha Koenig's ATM card and mobile phone. That's a random assortment of stuff you've got going on there in your car.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying.
That almost, like, on a lighter note, doesn't that sound like a sovereign citizen stop?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was way more cooperative. I've read the actual affidavit by the arresting officer, even though the FBI came and snatched him up. The officer who stopped him on the pretextual stop. I guess he was just acting shady as fuck, sweating, wearing a tank top, but still sweating, and is acting weird. He got really defensive when they asked to search his wallet. And then they got the FBI on scene, and there's a probable cause exemption in Texas, which allows them to search the car if they believe that it has been involved in a crime. And so they went ahead and did that, which is when they arrested him after finding Samantha's items. And then in his own wallet was the ATM card and her driver's license.
Mm.
Yeah,
how many mistakes can one guy make?
Hand in the cookie jar if you're sucking it. All right.
Yeah, why did he hold on to her driver's license?
Yeah, that's weird.
All right, so like a trophy or like, I mean, I don't know.
Maybe he had pink panties and transgender porn too. Those are more my questions. But anyway, let's move on.
Well, really quick, we were talking about his military service that people thought that he might have a boyfriend, and then like did he ever try to like sexually assault Bill or like a male?
He had planned to rape Bill, which is why he was so mad about that plan going sideways. And he did later claim that he was bisexual.
Okay,
so,
that
explains the transgender porn. Okay. All right. So the man was arrested. Upon questioning, he claimed he was in Texas to attend his sister's wedding, and he was driving to see the Grand Canyon. He asserted that the suspicious items in his possession were thrown into his car by an unknown individual. Beyond that, the man became silent, uncooperative during the rest of his interrogation. Police in Alaska, meanwhile, paid a visit to the man's home in Anchorage where nobody answered the door. They matched a truck parked in the driveway to one captured on the Home Depot camera footage pulling out of the same parking lot where Samantha Koenig had been abducted from common grounds on the evening of February 1st. The truck was registered to a man named Israel Keys. Samantha Koenig's body wouldn't be discovered until April 2nd, a few days after Keys confessed to the crimes, according to Oxygen. That's when he also explained how he staged the ransom photo by sewing Samantha Koenig's eyelids open. Unfortunately, Koenig's family would never get the justice for her murder.
Whew.
Dun dun dun.
So they discovered the body a little over a month later that he had dropped into a lake in pieces.
Well,
In
he had to tell
pieces.
them exactly where the body was for them to find it. Make
Well,
no
I can
mistake.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Lake hole.
finally, we're getting to the really, really creepy, weird parts of this. And probably the most unsettling parts, even if that wasn't unsettling enough, is the interviews with this motherfucker. And in his own words, the way that he describes things, I wish that we were smart enough to put clips on the show so I could like throw in a clip of him like, you know, doing his weird fucking giggle that he loves to do. He'll be like, well, seems obvious. And it's like this fucking, it's like a high pitched giggle. Fucking creepy as shit. So one of the books I read in preparation for this outline was American Predator, which is by Maureen Callahan, and pretty much opened the door for most of the information available in regards to this guy, to the extent that she actually got a lawyer and they petitioned the FBI to have records released. So the interviews that the FBI has released are thanks to her. Everything that you see pretty much in relation to this guy is thanks to her work on this book. So she petitioned for the records to be unsealed, which had been up until this point kept highly secretive, and they included over 30 hours of interviews with Keyes. So we're going to try and do a little bit of a back and forth here. Who's playing Israel? Go.
I'll play Israel.
What you got here?
I can play Israel. Real quick, before we jump into the interviews, I just, my big questions here were, and I know we've touched on it throughout the process with Samantha. This is, like you said, if it's unraveling, I can totally get that. But that's really where my questions are at here. If this guy is as intelligent as he's been, he's done what he's done. This one's a total fuck up from the start. So, like, again, is he? It seems like he's trying to get caught. Maybe that's just me. That's what it seems like to me. Like maybe he's just kind of, and he doesn't obviously say that.
Or maybe he's getting lazy or lax because he's gotten away with so many without being caught.
I truly believe
pushing the issue
that there was. Yeah. I think there was some catalyzing event in December of 2011, which if someone reminds me, I'll talk about a little tidbit of that later. But I think something happened around this time period that sent him into a spiral, and we're seeing the results of that spiral.
Midlife crisis.
Okay.
So some of the investigators had hope as they began their interviews that Samantha was still being held somewhere against her will. This first interrogation was critical. Only Keyes could tell them what happened and how. So I'll play the detective, and A-aron's gonna be Israel. I'm so sorry, serial killer.
No.
Was she alive when you? Was she alive when you left?
That would seem like an obvious question.
So she was alive.
When I left? No.
Keyes had demands before he would say more. He didn't want the house he shared with his girlfriend Kimberly torn apart anymore. The investigators needed to come to him and ask permission to search it. Maybe he would let them. And he didn't want them talking to Kimberly ever. He didn't care if they believed him. She had nothing to do with this.
So even when he's handcuffed, he wants control.
Oh my God.
Sounds
my God. I literally was bitching at my roommate earlier about this because I was so frustrated. I was like pacing around listening to interviews and shit. And I'm like, God, like, he's in control of everything all the time in these interviews. Constantly. It's hard to watch sometimes because, and we're going to get into some of the mistakes they made while interviewing him, but this was a huge one, was just letting him control everything constantly. Man. And yeah, you can make demands, but he felt like he could make those demands and they'd be listened to. So it's tough.
But I'll play devil's advocate here. They're holding out hope that this girl's alive, so they're trying to appease him a little bit to hopefully try and, I see where the guy's coming from. So
there's a lot to be said for, and we can talk a little bit about interrogation techniques and interview techniques later if you want. But there's a lot to be said about giving someone the illusion of control in certain situations. This is not the guy. This guy who gets off on control is not the guy to be giving control to. Not this level. Like, they do not approach it. Like, at first, if you believe the victim's alive, for sure, they went at it like anyone would have. They threw a couple different people in there, did a couple different techniques to see how he responded best. Of course, he clearly responds best to a woman because he wants to tell the graphic, horrifying details to her and watch her be shocked. That's one of his kinks, right? Which is a lot of serial killers that works on. It's like a Silence of the Lambs situation.
That even goes to like sales. Like you have the opposite sex sell to the other know, sex because you'll have higher sales numbers.
But as time goes on, they definitely needed to change that dynamic, and they didn't. But I'll let A-aron take his next quote.
All right. I don't want to hear about you questioning her again. Like I say, like I say, obviously you have no reason to trust me, but I can tell you right now that there is no one who knows me or who has ever known me, who knows anything about me, really. I'm two different people, basically. And the only person who knows about what I'm telling you, the kinds of things I'm telling you, is me.
How long have you been two different people?
A long time. 14 years.
Really interesting to note that he says 14 years. Really fucking specific. In hours and hours of continued interviews, Keyes slowly revealed more information. The analysts at the FBI's BAU, which is the Behavioral Analysis Unit, anyone who watches those really cringy TV dramas where they have like the behavioral science guys, that's what that is. They had stressed control. That everyone in the room should make Keyes feel like he had more than anyone. Again, that's what I talked about. In this situation where they think she might still be alive, yes. The truth was they didn't have to do anything. Keyes really did have all of it. He was back in the shed.
On the floor, there was a tarp and a foam mat and a sleeping, or not a sleeping bag really, but like a flea sleeping bag of sorts.
Did you put the tarp down to catch any blood?
No, just to keep anything from her transferring to the shed.
Gotcha. I don't gotcha. Keyes said he prepped the sheds a couple days earlier. He had no specific plan or person in mind, he said, though he'd been looking at the Huffman area because it was so full of coffee stands that were open late in isolated areas staffed by teenage girls, almost all of whom were alone. That night, he'd come upon Samantha. He liked the look of her and he went ahead. Even, I guess you could say, against my judgment, per his own words. He had thought about waiting for whoever was going to pick her up, boyfriend, as he'd correctly guessed, and taking both of them, but decided not to risk it. And then some research notes here. Samantha's boyfriend had told police at some time on the night of the 1st, he had observed a masked man breaking into the truck he shared with Samantha, but he had not reported it. The only things missing from the truck was Samantha's ATM card and her driver's license. So, we have several more fuck-ups here that Israel commits. After breaking into Samantha's truck, stealing her ATM card, and testing her PIN number at a local machine, he returned home. So, interesting fuck up here as well. He asked Samantha for her home address, takes the keys to her car, which had been at the coffee kiosk, but not the truck, right?
Right.
And drives to her home to steal the ATM card and the driver's license. On the way there, he realizes, I forgot to write down the fucking PIN number. He then drives back to his shed, goes back to Samantha, asks her for the PIN number, gets back in his truck, drives back to her house, gets into her truck, is discovered by the boyfriend, who calls no one, and then he leaves. Again. Unreal.
Well, the boyfriend does have a marijuana
80s
farm.
Montage.
Marijuana.
So,
yeah, maybe he thought he was high, but...
No, I can see why he wouldn't call the cops. Like, that's something like at home.
True.
Oh, shit, I don't want him to come and check out my marijuana farm,
That's a point. I mean, who the fuck knows why they... Just so many mistakes here, but...
Yeah.
Thankfully,
like
everyone else
literally.
is also making mistakes here. So, he tests the PIN number at a local machine and finds that I believe the card had 93 cents or something like that on it.
They're both teenagers. So.
Yeah. But he doesn't really want their money right now. He wants a count for the ransom money, which is so wild. Anyways, he goes to the kitchen at home, pours a glass of wine for himself, and I believe he actually also did bring wine to Samantha. And then he returned to the shed. This is per his own version of events. Samantha was remarkably composed. She asked if everything was working out. Did you reach my dad? She asked him. And Keyes told her, yep, it's fine. He knelt down and unscrewed the rope from the wall. He cut her cable ties. He knew what he was doing, igniting that last spark of hope, letting her think he'd be getting the ransom money while untying her, allowing her to think that surely this was the end, that as he had promised all night long, he'd finally be letting her go. But of course, he would not. It's another situation where he toys with somebody a little bit. Keys restrained. Yeah. Keys restrained Samantha again, this time in a more complicated way using ropes rather than the cable ties. She knew at that point, Keys said. He left the shed again and checked on Kimberly. Again, Keys returned to the shed. Space heaters had pushed the temperature inside to 90 degrees. Deafening heavy metal shook the walls. The acrid smell of smoke and urine and sweat permeated.
Ugh.
Keys said
be all humid in there.
Keys said he raped Samantha twice. It took, he said, a while, maybe 2 or 3 songs. On the radio. When he was done, he stood above her naked. Samantha asked if he was going to kill her. She tried to talk him out of it. Her fortitude was remarkable, Keys later said. Admirable, but it left him unmoved. Yes, Bret?
I don't know if I'm seeing a theme here, but it also said with Bill and Lorraine that he raped Lorraine twice. Is there a theme about, like, twice?
Must be.
Yeah.
I'm just...
Well, what verifies twice? Like, what is he saying? Like, he got to a point twice of, that orgasm
twice. Like, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Good question.
Like,
actually, that's a really good question.
Because on my perspective,
and we have to remember
twice,
these are per his own accounts.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's for his own account. So maybe he's saying, "Yeah, I can come twice," or I don't. Who the fuck knows? But
sounds like
again, this is his say.
Sounds like a bit of an overcompensation into the story.
It could be.
The fish I caught was this big.
Well, because Lorraine, they never found the bodies because you said like that building was razed, and then for her, like her body when they found her, she was in pieces at the bottom of the lake.
Right.
So I mean, this is all based on his.
It is
story, and history is written by the victor, so he was the victor. So whatever he says is kind of what we're going off of.
Uh-oh.
Sid looks like she has an issue with her recording. She's coming back.
All right.
No, I mean this guy's insane. Like I don't know how you cannot have a conscience and do these things. Like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I mean, if he's truly a psychopath, then empathy is obviously not emotion that the man shares. And she's back.
Right. I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. My computer gave me a random error all of a sudden. That's going to be extra work for me in the editing floor later.
You were on for like 15 seconds. We got you.
Oh, my God. And then I was like right on the edge of saying something. It was like a cliffhanger. You have to look at what motivates these guys. What gets him off? And as you can see during interviews and his own comments, and I mean, the way that he shares information, I don't actually believe that bragging gets him that satisfaction. So it's easier for me to put a little more stock in his words, not complete because you don't fucking trust a killer, but it's easier for me to believe that the information he's sharing is for that purpose versus bragging, because there's so many times that he could brag and doesn't, so many things he could brag about but doesn't, so many victims he could brag about and doesn't. I believe that the gratification that drives him to do all of this is from the act itself and the hunt and getting away with it versus the notoriety, which when he experiences it, he does admittedly get a taste of it and get a little overwhelmed by it. But it wasn't his goal to reach that, obviously, because otherwise he would have made many more mistakes before now. Same reason I don't really think he was trying to get caught. I think he was just having a fucking mental break or something was going on. So it's difficult for me to go, he was probably bragging, because that doesn't seem to get him the satisfaction that he's seeking. But it's definitely possible. It is certainly possible in all of this. He could be totally lying or bragging.
Well, I mean, I can think let's look at it in a different perspective. Maybe the bragging isn't the bragging that we're thinking of. In his crimes, his reaction, the reaction of his victims is something that he is drawn to. So in this situation, being caught, maybe that's the whole point, is that it's not bragging. It's the reactions of the people in the room. I know you guys have listened to a lot of tape. I don't know if there's footage that you've seen of the FBI
Yes.
officers reacting, etc. I can imagine, obviously, FBI being trained to do this sort of interrogation, but we are human beings and we do react to things. So maybe it's not bragging. I think it's kind of a fishing tale. Like maybe some of his details are a bit more fantasy land than may what have actually occurred, but not necessarily because of the bragging, maybe more of the reaction. Like, hey, look at me. Look what I
It's
can.
certainly possible.
And then Casey, I think you said on episode 1 you were talking about how he would, his like sexual kink was getting off on fear that we were talking about, that being a driving force. Right. And by him doing like the open-ended, threats or questions where that victim's imagination can make it so much worse than it could actually be, that could kind of make he figure out a way to instill more fear into his victim that way too. He kind
100%.
of
And I think
either way, crazy guy.
I think that he obviously, you're not going to take a victim to another location without the intention of in some way drawing out your enjoyment of the experience as a serial killer. Mm-hmm. So it does make sense to me that he would attempt at least to have sex with her, rape her multiple times, as opposed to just once and then kill her, because he's trying to, literally there'd be no reason to take her. He's trying to draw it out, increase the terror, draw out the experience and the euphoria for himself, because this is the only way he gets his kicks, is doing exactly what he's doing right now, is rape and killing and keeping a captive. So he's going to want that to last as long as possible, clearly. And if he has 2.5 hours, he's going to take 2 hours and 29 minutes of it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So we'll unfortunately go on to describing her murder with our good friend A-aron as a merciless serial rapist.
Back to being Isaiah. All right. Then I put my leather gloves on.
Why did you put your leather gloves on and not rubber gloves?
Because it's hard to strangle somebody. I knew from the minute she walked out of the coffee stand she wasn't going to live. She never made a sound.
How long did it take her to die?
It was taking, it's hard to tell. It was taking a while. I remember thinking, I still have to shower. Anyway, I'm not going to tell all that part, but I stabbed her once right below the right shoulder blade in her back, and it wasn't going very deep. I'm not going to go into that either, but anyway, I didn't really stab her to make her die fast or anything. It was something else, but yeah,
Did you stab her because you were still attracted to her?
No. I'm not going into that. I'm not going into that. I finished my wine and put my pants on and went back in the house and took a shower.
Then he woke his daughter up. While she got ready, Keyes returned to the shed yet again. The space heaters had been left on to slow rigor mortis. He rolled Samantha's body in a tarp, opened up his lower cabinets, stuffed her remains into the cabinets, turned off the heaters, double-locked the shed door, and called a cab. And now we have U.S. Attorney General Feldis in the room. What was your plan? You were getting on a plane and her body was in your shed. What were you thinking?
I was thinking it was 20 degrees outside and I didn't have anything to worry about.
Were you worried about getting caught?
No.
Why not?
Well, partly because it's Anchorage. I'd been listening to Police Scanner a lot recently and just kind of felt like by the time anybody figured out what had actually happened, the trail would have already gone cold. And even if they had pictures of my truck, they wouldn't know whose truck it was. They wouldn't have any tire tracks. They wouldn't have forensic evidence. They wouldn't have shoe prints. They certainly wouldn't have fingerprints or DNA or anything. So I didn't really worry about it.
This was sobering.
Just reading that
Bret,
and just reading that and pretending to put it as like the guy's crazy, man.
I know that's got to be hard.
Put yourself in that brain, like this was sobering, and if the investigators were honest with themselves, more than a little embarrassing. Keyes was right. He had predicted the response, or really lack thereof, to commit a crime of this magnitude, to drive around with a missing teenage girl for 3 hours with plenty of witnesses and not worry about getting caught because it's Anchorage. That was a damning indictment of the police department. It was true. James Koenig Samantha's father knew it. The hundreds of people who showed up for Samantha's candlelight vigil knew it. If the media ever heard this, all of Alaska would know it. The confession would never be logged with the court or documented anywhere. It'd be kept hidden for years. And now we're going to get into Kevin Feldis and his prosecutorial misconduct.
Okay. This is where I think the birds or the Illuminati or someone's fucking covering shit up. For those of you who may have missed this or who haven't read Maureen Callahan's book, which is probably most of you, An American Predator, Kevin Feldis is a U.S. assistant. He's a U.S. attorney's. He's with the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's an assistant prosecutor for the Attorney's Office in Anchorage. He's part of the team that interrogates Keyes in these interviews. What the fuck? If this doesn't sound weird to you, it should sound weird to you. In criminal law, there's the good guys and the bad guys. If you're one of those weird NCIC people or whatever, I've never seen it, I'm sorry. That means the prosecution and the defense, good guys and bad guys. The prosecution is responsible for bringing the case against the suspect. All right? They're charging the suspect. They have the burden of proof. They must build a case and charge the suspect. And that includes keeping evidence safe and sound, free from contamination or anything that might get the evidence thrown out. Evidence to include an interview, a taped interview, and a confession, or whatever comes out of that interview. The prosecuting attorney for the case can't be brought in as a witness because he's a fucking prosecutor. So therefore, he can't be in the room because anyone in that room can be brought in as a witness to what was said in that room, right? Are you tracking?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that he was in that room is prosecutorial misconduct. It's enough for a mistrial or for that entire confession to be thrown out, depending on the judge. It's
So,
insane.
theoretically, Israel could walk from this.
If anyone was smart enough to figure it out, or if he cooperated with his lawyers in the fucking slightest, or depending who brings the case. But if the state of Alaska is attempting to charge a felony committed in the state of Alaska, which would be this guy charging that crime, they're in super fucking hot water. This entire thing could be thrown out because of him being in that fucking room. There's no reason for him being in that room.
Well, because also
it's insane.
The prosecutor can't lie when asked a direct question, whereas the interviewers, if that would be in the room, can make like try to make deals or fake deals or whatever to get a confession or things.
Any
right?
deal. If I, a detective, am interviewing Israel Keyes, a serial killer, and I want to say, well, I'll talk to the DA about that. He's standing over my shoulder. Hey, buddy, you want to give him that deal? No? Well, there goes all of your fucking bargaining power. You see what I'm saying?
Your leverage is gone.
It's gone. You can't do that whole tactical walk out of the room and let the psychological silence deafen you while I go have this imaginary conversation with the DA. Really, I'm getting coffee. Yes.
So is this a common sense thing in their world? I mean, again, I'm not a lawyer or a DA, but should they know this? This isn't like something like, oh, it's kind of off the books. This is something that's pretty solid and basic foundation.
No. This is pretty fucking basic. It's unheard of.
So in your personal opinions, both of you guys being in this world, what could or would have caused this DA to be in there? I mean, is there a reason that may be underlying that us in the non-law enforcement world would know?
Tiny dick syndrome, probably.
Oh, okay.
My theory, and it's probably right, I would say it's political posturing. It's a big fish, big case. Like, hey, get out of my way. This is my jurisdiction. I'm going to like...
Jurisdiction crap.
Exactly. Get the headlines. It's Alaska. There's not the huge population. Get your face out there. Be frontline news. Like, I'm for the people. I'm doing this. And it's political posturing for future endeavors.
Super weird.
Could it have something to do with
Aaron.
the fact, too, that he made that comment about he could do it because it's Anchorage, like something of that nature?
Took it personal.
Like you said, kind of the big dick syndrome.
I think he'd made that comment with Feldis already in the room.
Got it. All right.
It doesn't there's nothing that makes a lot of sense here besides
it's wrong.
Politics. It's wrong. It's procedurally very wrong. And apparently somebody did officially make a complaint that he was there, but again, somehow he was still allowed to remain in the room. Again, it never went far enough for it to become an issue, as we'll learn later. As far as the case never went to trial, obviously, but if it had, this would be the first thing a defense attorney would jump on so fast. However, it doesn't, even if the whole thing kind of becomes a moot point because now they want to charge him at the federal level versus the state level. So it's just, there's so many ways this went sideways, to include this man being in the room. And if you were to try to Google the words Kevin Beldis prosecutorial misconduct, you know what comes up is this motherfucker's LinkedIn bio. And I believe a total of one forum comment somewhere that asks that question. But everything else is just his professional pages, news articles, nothing at all mentioning prosecutorial misconduct in relation to this guy and Israel Keys. So, unfortunately, we have now talked about Samantha's sad fate.
Yeah.
And there's more interviews to come, which we'll get into in part 3.
A lot more.
What do you guys
Part
think?
3.
Yeah, we'll have to do a part 3 on this because there's just
the interviews,
so much good material.
just from
so
some
sorry.
pre-reading
so
that I've
much,
done in
guys.
your outlines and stuff, like the interviews look great, guys. So yeah, definitely pay attention to that because it's some crazy
and
shit,
then
man.
The bank robberies.
Oh.
Got the bank robberies in detail coming
Yeah,
up.
I like those. I like those.
There's so much that falls apart here, but what really interests me is Keys's own words, basically, and how you start seeing into his psyche. It's really interesting because as A-aron was reading for Israel, there's parts in the interview itself where he actually giggles. So when you were reading the lines, I was just hearing that stupid fucking giggle in my head.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
I mean, not to like say I'm some sort of actor here, but just reading it, like reading what you have here and knowing that this is what's coming out of this criminal's mastermind, criminal killer, criminal serial killer, whatever you might call him. It's very interesting on my side as well. But I definitely enjoy the back and forth. There's kind of very true crime.
Me too. So we're going to continue our interview techniques as we go on. I'm going to let Bret be the interviewer, and I'm going to fucking vape. And join us back here in part 3 to wrap up Israel's sad but well-earned
demise.
And fuck this guy, to be honest with you. He's not all that brilliant. Stop glorifying him. We're going to point out every way that he fell apart like a wet paper bag in part 3.
Yeah, our first part 3.
Look at that.
I know. Oh my God. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.